Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Supatease video. We just completed all of the melee DPS reviews. If you want to check out any of the melee DPS specs, I've got a playlist linked down in the description below, and I ranked them based on how fun I thought they were and how long I could play those specs before I got bored of them. A link to that tier list will also be in the description down below. Now we've got healers. We need to go through how fun are all of the healers looking in Shadowlands? Are they going to be specs that I'm going to stay interested in for a long time and want to keep playing? That's really what I'm looking for right now, because getting damage tuning and healing tuning accuracy at right now is just not going to happen. You would hope at the end of the day that they're all just competitively viable, and then your only decision is how much fun do you have with them. I am taking into consideration different complexity levels, so I will point out when I think a spec would be more enjoyable if you're looking for a simpler gameplay experience, or for more so myself, a more complicated experience. So I'm looking for a lot of utility on top of the rotation, and a little bit more than just a feel. So Restoration Druid is probably the spec that I've spent the most time with throughout World of Warcraft, just period. Mythic raiding, Mythic plussing, PvP, basically the entire thing. And what it seems like to me for druids, their main goal is to bring back more of you're a druid as opposed to just your own specialization. So they've brought back things like Iron Fur and Ferocious Bite. So if every once in a while you're in cat form and you're not feral affinity, you'll be able to generate combo points with Shred and then do a little bit of extra damage. If you need to jump into bear form to beef up your tankiness, you'll have access to Iron Fur as well without going for the Guardian affinity, which is nice. Now, when you're in those forms, you'll have something to do when you have these buttons coming back baseline. Another important component that either stands to be the most ridiculously powerful crowd control in the game, which I mean, it kind of already is, a 6-second immunity. So you cast Cyclone, which is now baseline to your class, and the target that gets cycloned becomes immune to all damage, all effects. So if this is usable on Mythic Plus Trash, you can deny a lot of really crazy affixes like bursting, cyclone. Let's say 3 monsters are getting low. You could cyclone one of them so that not all 3 die at the same time and stack bursting. Or if necrotic is getting too high on the tank, you could cyclone the monster. Then the tank gets time to run away. Cyclone does stand to either be absolutely insane, not only just in PvP, which it has always been, but also strong potential in PvE. So it's a great addition overall to the Druid kit in terms of what you can do. I would say in dungeons, Resto Druid had the highest, what do you want to say, complexity or skill cap of any healer, maintaining damage over time effects on monsters, trying to min-max going to cat form while still maintaining your group's health. It was, in my opinion, the most challenging experience and the most rewarding experience, likely why it was also the strongest in dungeon environment for quite a long time. I think the main downside for Restoration Druid has been its raid performance, which feels like it's more or less just a tuning thing, right? Like, if Resto Druid is underperforming by 20% healing output over other healers, then that just seems like an output issue, which leads to a bigger and broader issue with the game that I should probably talk about in a different video, but maybe it's worth mentioning, which is there's basically subsets of games in WoW. You've got the raiding game, you've got the dungeon game, you got the PvP game, right? And to balance a spec so it functions balanced in all of those when they're completely different is actually, I would, in my mind, basically an impossible feat. And if anything, they're doing a really good job of getting it as close as possible for that. But I'm wondering if it should ultimately be like that, or if spells should function differently in those categories, right? I mean, Resto Druids have a spell here, if you look at the bottom right, that does. Tranquility, look at the bottom. Healing is increased by 100% when not in a raid. To me, that's not confusing. And then if Tranquility is overperforming in raids, you can balance Tranquility to not overperform in raids. I clearly understand that if I use it in another environment, that it does more healing. So I would honestly like to see this done with more abilities when there's blaring issues of a spec that's just clearly underperforming in a dungeon, but overperforming in a raid. Make some of their spells function 100 times better. I mean, this is an exaggeration of an example, but make some of their spells function 100 times better, not in a raid. and then they can be still competitive in raids, still competitive in dungeon. I would honestly like to see the approach that's been done here to Tranquility to more things when situations like that happen, where they've got this difficult decision like Druid is the best in dungeons and PvP, so if we buff it because it's lacking in raids, it's even stronger in those environments, and then there's more bigger problem now. So taking this approach, I think, would be a better solution. But aside from that, some things you do need to look forward to for potential raid viability will be things like Stampeding Roar coming back baseline. So you'll just get a raid-wide sprint. This is really good for any sort of mechanics that involve like a transition phase that involves movement. So there's like a lot of bridge fights where you'll start on one platform and then have to cross a big bridge to go to another platform. And there might be things you need to avoid like landmines or whatever. So Stampeding Roar is a good way of getting across that type of bridge. So you will have utility in that sense. The only downside is that this is available to all Druid specs. So if Resto Druid is such an underperformer in raids, you could just bring a Balanced Druid or a Feral Druid to do the same thing. But it is raid utility nonetheless. It's also just great in PvP. Excellent utility there. And I think it is good in Mythic Plus as well, to just get some extra movement going pull to pull, or maybe to avoid a certain mechanic in time. Say if you're playing with a DPS spec that doesn't have a lot of mobility like a Death Knight, you can assist them out quite a lot with it. And that's basically it for baseline Druid abilities and what you should be expecting. As far as Restoration Druid specific, they're going to be giving us Ursul's Vortex baseline. But it is at the downside of basically losing Typhoon. And this is strictly in a Mythic Plus setting where I still believe you'll be playing Feral Affinity, and we'll get to it when I look at the talents. But you'll get Ursul's Vortex at all times, which is just great for clumping monsters together, preventing them from running away. It's just great utility in general. Again, another reason to potentially bring a Druid to a raid if there's ever a bunch of mobs that spawn that need to be controlled far away or maybe pulled together and bursted down. This is an excellent spell to do it, and you'll have it baseline at all times on the Restoration Druid, which is excellent. The other one would be Nature's Swiftness, which you don't get until you level up a little bit in Shadowlands. It's only going to be Regrowth, Rebirth, and Entangling Roots, so no instant cast Cyclones, which would have been notoriously powerful in probably all content, and somewhat understandable that they didn't bring it back like it was in the past, where it was usable with Cyclone. Nice little pick-me-up heal. This is going to be a good addition because we're losing 2 charges of Swiftmend, and Swiftmend will have much more of a negative impact when we look more closely at it. They're removing the Stonebark talent, so they've taken half of the Stonebark talent and then turned it into a passive that you unlock while you're leveling. The advantage is that you'll get that second passive at all times, but it means that your Ironbark is a 1.5 minute cooldown, which definitely impacts your ability to recover a single target like a tank more frequently. Perhaps this is to even the odds with Druids and maybe Mistweavers who lack damage reduction cooldowns and required like a huge exorbitant amount of overtuning to even make them the best healer in Mythic Plus towards the end of BFA. Innervate's going to get a secondary effect where if you cast it on an ally, you'll benefit from half of its effect, so you get half off your spells. So maybe, you know what, if Resto Druid isn't good, maybe you still bring a Resto Druid to give Innervate to the good healers. You know, you can be the Robin to the Batman. You might get a rate spot. Hopefully it's just the case where the tuning is done in a way that all the healers feel important. And then this other passive heal will be gaining as you level up is Regrowth's Initial Heal has a 40% chance for critical effect when you heal with it. I'm curious with some of the Covenant abilities when we look at them, if this will have some cheeky synergies and some unique builds. Usually cheeky synergy and unique build means not meta and you're kind of just memeing, but it could be funny. And I like looking into that kind of stuff. But now looking at Swiftmend, you'll notice that you will consume a heal over time effect to do it, which is how this used to work for Swiftmend. So if I put Rejuvenation up and then I use Swiftmend, it will consume it. We're losing the Azurite trait Grove Mending, so we're losing a lot of power in Swiftmend in general. So it is important that Nature's Swiftness is coming back for us as a secondary recovery mechanic for single target healing, which we're going to be lacking. But that's pretty much it for spells that are coming back baseline. If we look at the talent trees, some things have been shifted around. It seems to me that they've decided that a couple of PvP honor talents are so fun that they should be just in the class baseline. I'm still of the opinion that Healing Touch should just be in the game as a low mana cost, long casted heal. So if you want to pick between Bursty, efficient, get this heal out to top somebody, you use regrowth. And then if you want to go for, you've got a little bit of time, you don't want to overheal and spend too much mana, you go for a healing touch. To me, that's always been where regrowth and healing touch have fit with each other. This version of Nourish, it heals for a set amount and it triples for mastery. So if you want to do a full mastery druid, which generally Resto Druid does, some sort of haste mastery build in PvE, maybe haste versatility in PvP. So this might not be so great for PvP if you're doing that, but it's going to scale better with the more stats you get. So you might want to avoid it early on unless some huge amount of tuning goes around it, where it is actually the best heal. In my mind, I've got my eyes more set on Cenarian Ward, sort of to act as the second charge of Swiftmend that you used to have in Battle for Azeroth, and it still synergizes with your mastery to benefit all of your extra healing. So likely I'm going back to a Cenarian Ward build of healing when Shadowlands comes out for my Restoration Druid. The Affinities have had all one extra spell added to them, and this is where your Typhoon is gone. No longer here, but look, Heart of the Wild. It's going to be in balance affinity. This is where I said for Mythic Plus Druids, you're basically losing Typhoon because you're almost always going to want Feral Affinity for more damage. Just instant, immediate damage. You apply the dot and it's over, whereas Balanced Druid would require you to spend quite a bit of time. There is potential for synergies with the Night Fae Covenant abilities that we'll be looking at for this to maybe work out and be kind of cheesy for some big burst pulls potentially with Convoke the Spirits, but you will lose Typhoon running Feral Affinity. This will apply to not so badly in PvP because you didn't really take it anyways in PvP. In Raid, you don't really care other than, I guess, would you want the knockback for a mechanic, extra range on your healing, or would you want to move faster to get out of a certain mechanic, or just damage reduction at all times? Usually damage reduction at all times supersedes the other benefits unless there's a specific range mechanic you can stand out of range of, or there's something that you wouldn't otherwise be able to move out of, but you're a druid. I really don't see you having a problem moving out of too many things. So just getting damage reduction on massive pad fights is a good idea with a 6% damage reduction. But you'll get Maim as an extra stun. It's going to be great for PvP. So you get another stun in case you're running Heart of the Wild and you don't have Bash anymore. So that's going to recover there. Incapacitating Roar is really good as well because it's on the Polymorph diminishing return. So you could do an incapacitate. Let's say there's a Demon Hunter chasing you. You know that feels a Restoration Druid. And they want to burn you down harder than Teldrassil with Mana Rift in PvP. You can use Incapacitating Roar and then Cyclone, or Incapacitating Roar and then Entangling Roots, and you can set up crowd control on yourself much more easily with Incapacitating Roar. I'm thinking even way back to the Mists of Pandaria days where you would set this up, you would displace your beast in, and you'd use Incapacitating Roar into NS Cyclone. Man, that was an oppressive crowd control chain that you used to be able to do. You can do that similarly now in PvP. So the Feral Affinities are getting a little bit more depth. They're also going to get some nice synergies with Heart of the Wild. And right now at the moment, what seems to be the most interesting about Druid is Heart of the Wild plus an Affinity plus Convoke the Spirits. And when we get to Convoke the Spirits, it'll make more sense. But Convoke the Spirits is just cast 16 Druid spells. So if I pop Heart of the Wild and I'm in cat form with Feral Affinity, I'm casting 16 Feral spells in 4 seconds. That's a lot of damage, a lot of burst. Same thing with Boomkin. If I jump into Balance form with Balance Affinity, I'm pumping out stuff really fast. That looks really fun. I don't know if it'll actually be the best. It has looked really fun. And then same thing for Guardian. You can pop Heart of the Wild, go into Bear form, and get 2 Frenzy Regeneration charges. Excuse me. And then be able to top yourself off really effectively and be highly durable. So it would be in my imagination for almost all content except raids where you have mechanics where monsters spawn and start walking. That's usually, if you're thinking about like the walls not Tuma Sargeras, in Taurus, if you think about the walls in Taurus that would spawn and start walking towards the middle of the room, or Skitra, where the images spawn and then they start walking. Mass Entanglement is almost always a must-take in those situations, which I think it still will be. But Bash as a single target stun is going to fall off heavily, I think, to the extra utility you would get from Heart of the Wild and Mythic Plus for Feral Affinity damage, maybe Balance Affinity damage, and then in PvP for Feral Affinity, Balance Affinity, or Guardian benefits. I think Heart of the Wild is going to be the staple. Fortunately, there are some conduits and legendaries when we get to that part that will enable that playstyle a lot more. And that's really what I want to see for Druid is a less of I'm just only a Resto Druid. I can also participate in these other shapeshift roles and have them be enhanced. So that's certainly something to look forward to. Tree of Life is going to benefit heavily from that passive change for regrowth where it has more crit. So take that into account, Tree of Life might becoming more viable, especially because without 2 Swiftmend charges, Soul of the Forest will only benefit from 1 Swiftmend. It's still probably the go-to for throughput, but again, cheeky, cheesy builds. It might be the revenge of the bloodthirsty broccoli in a moment when we get to that point. Overgrowth has replaced Stonebark. This was the PvP talent. I can only imagine that they are just going to remove. So Overgrowth was removed, yes. Overgrowth was removed, but Nourish hasn't. So, which is surprising when Nourish is baseline. I think they're going to have to do a pass where as soon maybe they've finalized this as a PvE talent, they'll delete the PvP version of it. Because it seems weird and odd that you would have 2 Nourishes, or maybe this could become Healing Touch. It seems weird as an honor talent, but I'm not sure what their plan is yet to deal with that, where there's PvP talents that are becoming baseline and they're still existing as PvP talents. Regardless, Overgrowth doesn't look like it's existing as a PvP talent, so it's only going to be PvE. In raids, I don't know, getting Tranquility on a short cooldown or just healing everybody for more inside of your Efflorescence seems like you would want that. But maybe in Mythic Plus, where you're switching into cat form a lot and trying to get to the top of the damage meter, then you could just quickly recover with Overgrowth on your tank and still get a ton of damage out. In PvP, this is probably the go-to to just for the same thing. If you're spending time doing other things than just healing and maintaining HOTS, this will allow you to recover as it has in Battle for Azeroth. Moving down to the final row, there's no changes to Photosynthesis, Germination, and Flourish, although Photosynthesis could have strong potential with some of the legendaries, which we're going to take a look at right now. Or, well, actually, we'll look at the Covenant abilities first because I got it laid out that way. For Kyrian, we got the Kindred Spirits, which allows you to bond with another person. It's very important that we are bonding during these times, in game. And basically, you'll be able to empower that bond every minute, where you'll get a beacon effect if it's a healer, and then you get extra healing because of that, or you'll get an extra little bit of an absorb from a damage dealer. As to whether or not which situation is going to be used at all times, I think it's still yet to be said. For the most part, I don't think you'll ever be using it on a tank. You'll almost always just be using it either on a healer or on a DPS to try and benefit them and add to their extra damage. Again, you might be able to get into a group just because you beef up the team a lot with this. But if you're just on your own, then you'll just cast it on yourself. You'll get 10% more healing. This used to be and damage, but it's only healing. So, I mean, if you didn't want to be too helpful and you just want to only benefit yourself, then you would just go for this every minute, just a 10% healing buff. Kyrian get the bonuses of stun reduction when they're standing still for a long time, which can be good for a Druid if you want in PvP specifically. PvE, probably don't care too much. There's a lot of versatility buffs, stat buffs in the Kyrian Soulbinds, so something to take into account as well. You'll get the Steward for extra vials, some little quality of life. Hopefully this ends up being usable in PvP, otherwise it would be the only secondary that isn't. This is where the cheesy builds start to come in here. This is the Vampire Broccoli. The revenge of the broccoli, okay? This ravenous frenzy. For 20 seconds, every spell you cast increases your damage, healing, and haste by 2%. And if you spend 1.5 seconds idle, then everything that you've been doing backfires on you and does a bunch of damage to you, and you get stunned for a second. Now, if you were in broccoli form, spamming out a bunch of instant cast regrowths, maybe make them free with Innervate, you could stack this up pretty quickly and potentially get a lot of damage out. Maybe towards the end of it, it's the same cooldown as Tree of Life, so it's already telling me that that's their main goal with this, is you would want to be a Tree of Life Druid. It's just really odd that you're a blood-sucking Tree of Life. But yeah, if you want to do that. Outside of that, for a Resto Druid, all of your spells are instant, so it's pretty easy to maintain. But it doesn't stand out to me, mostly because I don't want another 3-minute cooldown. I don't generally like 3-minute cooldown game, especially when it's personals as a Resto Druid. I'd much prefer the next one that we're about to get to, which is Necrolord. If I was going to pick something, it's just a shorter cooldown to manage, but you get Door of Shadows for some extra movement, which is important to take into account. There's a lot of crit modifiers in the Soulbinds for Venthyr, so if you're a PvP focused player, you're going to lose out because crit isn't as beneficial. But if you want to be a vampire tree, go ahead and be a vampire tree. Necrolord Covenant, the Adaptive Swarm. I just pretend it's Insect Swarm so I can feel good about myself and missing Insect Swarm. Basically, you put this up. It's a hot, so it'll benefit from your mastery. And it buffs all the healing of your hots on that target. Then it'll bounce to an enemy target, increase all the dot damage, so you can get a Moonfire, Sunfire up, maybe a couple bleeds even. In cat form, that will get benefited, and then it'll bounce back and benefit your healing again on a target. Such a low cooldown, you can start to get more than one up. So to me, this is the most fun one for all environments. Will it be the best performer? Probably not, but it's yeah, I guess it could be. It's just the most straightforward. It's kind of cool to like look at like which target it moves to. Should you try and get your dot on, or your hots onto that target? Is it a priority? It's nice just to have the extra hot as well. It gives you a little bit of damage. It's like a low cooldown that you're always interacting with it. I personally like the Adaptive Swarm. Fleshcraft is just a shield you cast on yourself. It was nerfed. One of the soulbinds made it so that if you had the shield, you're immune to crowd control. Now, instead of that, you're only immune to crowd control while you're channeling it, which is still good if you time it at a good point. You might be able to immune a crowd control on yourself before they're able to interrupt you. So there's still some high skill cap play there. And then in PvE, you could also immune some crowd control if you waited to time the channel right before a mechanic hits where you might get stunned and you could avoid being stunned. So some pretty significant benefits here from the Necrolords overall, which is odd because, again, undead druids and vampire druids, but all right. The Night Fae Covenant, the one that you would anticipate everybody wants to be, and it looks just as crazy as the animation that is playing here. Convoke the Spirits. You just cast 16 Druid spells over 4 seconds. It's had a lot of quality of life changes, so now you can channel it and move. It does, at least from my practicing with it, does seem like it prioritizes a little bit more based on what form you're in and what targets are around you. So it'll use melee attacks more often when there's melee mobs next to you. Uses healings when you're out of Moonkin form and there's lots of targets to heal. So it seems like it's getting smarter over time. And this is the one that could either be absolutely crazy good, like you can take out a whole trash pull switching into Boomkin form and popping this with Heart of the Wild or something. Same goes in PvP as well with like Heart of the Wild Feral Affinity plays. It could be absolutely insane, or it could just end up totally flopping. It seems like it would be more fun than Adaptive Swarm, but a little bit potentially less practical if it doesn't end up working out, so you run that risk. The other one is the Soul Shape, so you'll be able to turn into a little fox. They've been buffing the movement speed on this. I think that's in response to the feedback that a lot of classes just move faster without even activating it, and it's supposed to be a movement increasing effect. So its movement increasing effect has been increased dramatically to try and compensate for that. There's other soul binds to make it give you a little bit of damage reduction as well. When you switch into the fox, and you also get there's a lot of options for slows in the Soulbind Covenant for Night Fae. So if you were wanting to get maybe some extra slows out, you could talent for those as well. But that's pretty much it for the Night Fae. We look at the legendaries, which still one is waiting to be seen. But at the moment, our general legendaries are when Rake, Rip, or Rejuve are on a single target, their effects are increased by 30%. I don't see this being worth trading in almost any circumstance as a druid. It's just never your priority to maintain this on only one target. It seems counterintuitive to the class entirely. This is a legendary that I'm probably just ignoring the entire duration of the expansion. Your damage over time effects here occur 25% more quickly, and your heal over time effects occur 10% more quickly. It could have synergies with the Adaptive Swarm. I like the way that it sounds. As to whether or not it's a top performer in PvE is just going to be entirely tuning. And then Druid Runecarve 1, the effects of Thickhide, Astral Influence, and Feline Swiftness in your stairs get to increase by 100%. When you shift into your Affinities form, you gain Heart of the Wild. So if you really want that Heart of the Wild gameplay to try and get some big damage out, I mean, this is going to have a lot of creativity tied into it for PvP, potentially for Mythic Plus as well. This is one that I have my eyes on, especially with some of the conduits that will synergize with Heart of the Wild. So if you really want that shapeshifting gameplay, then this is one that you should look out for. Resto Druid specific legendaries: Memory of the Mother Tree. Wild Growth has a 25% chance to cause your next Rejuve or Regrow to apply to 2 additional allies. I mean, this is obviously really strong for just raid hot application. The Dark Titan's lesson, you may life bloom 2 targets at once, and life bloom's final healing is increased by 200%. This leads back to the synergies with photosynthesis. While life bloom is on an ally, your periodic heals on them have a chance to cause it to bloom. So that could have some really powerful, punchy healing coming through with that legendary. I've got my eyes on it. Druid Runecarve number 3. Swiftmend no longer consumes a heal over time effect and extends the duration of your heal over time. So you could go for an overgrowth Swiftmend and then extend all of those hots. That has some good synergies there with the overgrowth. This assists you a lot with your single target healing and removes the downside of the Swiftmend bonus. There's a lot of choices here for legendaries in terms of what you want to get done. Druid Resto Runecarve 4, Rejuvenation Healing has a 2% chance to create a new rejuve on a nearby target. Just a really old school tier bonus there. Would be good for raids, probably a lot less good for dungeons and PvP. So if you were raid specific, you could be running maybe these 3 here, the Dark Titan, the Runecarve 4, or Memory of the Mother Tree. But if you were going to run in Mythic Plus, perhaps this Swiftmend or even this Heart of the Wild one, if your healing output is fine, then you may want to benefit more from getting extra damage with the Feral Affinity. Something to take into consideration. A lot of playstyle choices to be made. Resto Druid Conduits. So conduits are the new system moving into Shadowlands, and they're basically just gem sockets. You have potency ones, you have endurance ones, you have finesse ones. Potency are throughput. So for Resto Druid, obviously that's increasing healing. The number 1 conduit here is your wild growth healing falls off 30% less over time. Great for raids. Just good for an overall healing. Probably this would be less so in PvP. It's much better for PvE. Druid Potency Resto 2, regrowth heals for an additional 20%. Hey, the Vampire Broccoli, you want even more powerful broccoli heals with that regrowth. This would be a good one to go for. Benefits you more for single target healing. And then this third one, Swiftmend's healing is increased by 30% of the consumed heal over time effect. Would be interesting if you get the legendary where it doesn't consume, it would assume it would still work. So then you could go for an overgrowth and then into a Swiftmend, not consume it, and get the most benefit out of this. But usually the old school style of healing with Swiftmend when it consumed hots was to wait until the end. So does this consume based on the remaining time of the hot, or does it consume based on the hot's total effectiveness? That's a little bit vague. The way that I'm reading it, it would be based on how much healing is left. So you wouldn't actually want to do that old style of waiting till the hot was about to run out, then Swiftmending it off and reapplying it, which would be a little bit weird because using it like this was like generally the bad way of using it if you could get away with not doing it, because you'd be removing the hot and then you would need to get another one up without even getting a benefit from its healing. So a little bit weird at the moment. Druid Potency Resto 4, Nature Swiftness cooldown is reduced by a certain percent. These all scale up and get stronger. So Swiftmend will heal for more as you level this conduit up. Regrowth will heal for more. Wild growth will fall off less over time, even further, and Swiftmend will be a shorter cooldown. This is more beneficial in PvP, likely, or Mythic Plus, where you might need an immediate recovery because you're doing things with Feral Affinity. But these are all good conduits. I would say you would use these 3 in all environments of the game, and this wild growth would only really benefit you in raid and then potentially Mythic Plus. These are conduits that affect your Covenant spell. So the empowerment cooldown is reduced. The cooldown is reduced, so you can empower somebody else or yourself a little bit more frequently if you get this conduit. For the Vampire Broccoli, you can increase your critical strike chance by 2% for every stack, get even bigger regrowths. Maybe as you've stacked it up towards the end, you pop Heart of the Wild, go into cat form, and you got that maxed out damage benefit, haste benefit, and now crit benefit. And you could go for a really big bursty window there with Feral Affinity and cat form. Adaptive Swarm increases periodic effects by an additional 6%, just a buff to its already good baseline mechanic. I like to see that. And then Night Fate, while channeling Convoke the Spirits, your damage and healing are increased by 12%. Even more chance for some nutty balance affinity, Heart of the Wild, Convoke the Spirit combos, maybe Feral Affinity, Convoke the Spirit combos. To me, this is like, it stands out as like a lot of fun. Adaptive Swarm doesn't seem as fun, but it's probably more practical. The Venthyr one is a little bit cheesy. I'm not really going for it at the moment. And then the Kyrian one, I'm more or less just waiting to see how it works out. It might be a really good throughput one, but I'm not as excited about it as I am Adaptive Swarm or Convoke the Spirits. Endurance Conduits, this is defense sockets that you're going to put into your soul mines. So cooldown reduction for Bark Skin, always good to get damage reduction cooldowns. Would be even more insane if it was on Iron Bark, because Iron Bark's on 1.5 minute cooldown now. But Bark Skin would be great. For 4 seconds after shifting into bear form, you get extra health and armor that will benefit your Frenzy Regeneration healing. And then you get regrowth and Frenzied Regeneration healing increased by 12% on yourself. So if you only want, I guess this will also benefit renewal if you're playing renewal and you needed it as a personal heal. But this would be just for every time you frenzy regen or regrowth. So overall efficiency, probably this. Maybe PvP, if you think you're going to be attacked, it would be this. But you benefit in a lot more situations with the third option. And finesse, which is utility. Rebirth grants the target 50% movement speed and well fed, increasing their primary stat. I mean, just because I'm a PvP player mostly, I don't like seeing ones that use benefit spells I can't use. So I would probably avoid this. But if you're in a raid with a minor benefit, I mean, they just eat their own food later. I guess it rebuffs their food buff when you res them. Stampeding Roar's radius and duration are increased by 15%, so you can hit more targets further away and it lasts longer. That's great for raid utility. Could be good for PvP utility as well. But then this one stands out the most. The cooldown of Mighty Bash, Mass Entanglement, and Heart of the Wild is reduced by a certain percent and scales up. So if we can get that Heart of the Wild cooldown down real low, plus the legendary where you shapeshift into the form and you get Heart of the Wild active, I mean, you could be in situations where you got Heart of the Wild up for most of a fight, and that would enable that shapeshifting playstyle so heavily. This is the utility conduit that stands out to me. Tireless Pursuit, for 2 seconds after leaving cat form or travel form, you retain their movement speed bonus. Again, just kind of, you already move fast enough. You don't really need it. To me, it would either be Stampeding Roar for raid, and then this Heart of the Wild play style that likely is going to be predominant for Shadowlands with the way everything is rolling out with Convoke the Spirits, Adaptive Swarm, the Feral Affinity changes, or just Affinity changes in general, and this sort of emphasis on Druid as a hybrid role and a shapeshifter, which for me personally sounds excellent. It's what I would be looking for in the Druid. And other than that, that pretty much concludes Resto Druid and what I think of it moving forward for Shadowlands. I'm going to be reviewing Restoration Shaman, Mistweaver Monk, Discipline Priest, Holy Paladin. I already did Holy Priest. Like I said, if you like this type of content, please subscribe to the channel so you're notified when my videos go live, as I'm producing a video every day. And then I'll be doing tier lists for the specs. The next tier list will be healers. I just did melee DPS. I've done ranged DPS. The tier lists are ranking the classes based on my personal assessment of them for how enjoyable they'll be to me, how long I feel I'll be able to play with them before I get bored. And that's, I do take into consideration, maybe you want to play something that's simpler as well, and not just only applying my subjective opinion towards what is fun, but applying a bunch. So it's trying to leave it as unbiased as I can, but it's still somewhat biased, but I try and point it out when I'm aware of it. Aside from that, thank you. Please like the video if you like the video. Leave a comment down below if you think I missed something, or you want to talk about something that you think would be cool for Restoration Druid in Shadowlands. And aside for that, that's going to be it here for Resto Druid. We'll see you in the next video.